Hi, I'm Warwick from Harder and Steenbeck, and I'm super excited about the topic of the video today. Today, I'm going to be showing you the innovations that we've got on our new Ultra airbrush. They're designed to support the first hours and days of a beginner's painting journey with some really simple innovations that we believe will have you using the airbrush with just a completely positive experience straight out the box. We've looked at the common pitfalls that every beginner seems to suffer when they're trying to learn the airbrush, and we've tried to engineer them out. Now, I've got another video which is explaining all of those features. So I'm not going to go into that in too much detail here. Here, I'm just going to focus on doing a really simple paint job on a Space Marine. What we're going to do is we're going to get it into primer. We're going to put some Zenithal highlights down. We're going to reinforce those Zenithals with some detail highlights. And then we're going to put a glaze over that Space Marine. This gets it to a point where if you want to follow that up with some dry brushing to pick up the edges, you're going to have a model that's playable right from the off. The goal of this airbrush is to put you in a position where you're able to recreate this in your first 20 minutes of painting. So a couple of things to think about. First of all, set your compressor up at about 25 psi. We're going to leave the compressor running in this video. So if you hear it, that's on purpose, because so many people ask us, these oil-free compressors from brands like Sparmax, for example, how much noise do they make? Well, we're just going to let it run so that you can hear it in the video. So I hope it's not distracting for you, but I think it's all good information. So if you've got your airbrush already, paint along, because I believe that you should be able to paint at the same pace as me, because the process is so simple that I think it's going to be possible for you, even if it's your first time painting. So let's get into it. So I'm going to pull the airbrush out the box. All of the airbrushes now are finished in chrome, which is just a great finish for them. It means that they're going to last for absolutely years and years and years. Plug the cup in, okay, and then get your hose and push it on to the quick disconnect on the bottom. Now, what we've done very briefly is we've created a system at the front that deals with clogging so that you don't suffer that during your painting process. It'll happen, so we'll show you how it works whilst we're painting. We've got a trigger system that addresses the one problem that every beginner faces, which is how to use a double action trigger. You've got to push them down before you pull them back. So all we've done with this Ultra is we've engineered it so that you can't pull it back until you push it down. Okay, so that out the box teaches you perfect double action trigger technique. Behind that, we've got a rotatable collar that gives you 5 different trigger settings as to how far back you pull it. And we'll talk those through as we get painting. All of the paint formulations that we're going to be using for this, you can use this with all of the common paints that people use to paint miniatures with. So I'm thinking about Vallejo Game Air, Model Air, Citadel. Just do the thinning ratio at 1:1 and it'll work really well for the purposes of learning this system. So let's start out with getting a primer down. So I'm going to put 7 drops of thinner in here. Thinner always goes in first. Then I'm going to put down 7 drops of the dark primer. Okay, once that's in there, I've got this old bent needle that I've kind of bent into a little ring on the end. I just dip that in, twizzle it around. That's a great way of using your old needles for a good purpose. Get some color moving. And then the collar, I'm just going to turn it onto prime. Okay, now that is designed to work at a distance of approximately 1 hand's width away from the miniature. So if you just kind of get 1 hand's width away, that's the right distance for this setting. Push the trigger down, pull it back until it hits a stop, and just keep the airbrush moving over the miniature. You'll see the color start to build. You want to keep the airbrush moving quickly enough that you don't let it get too glossy. Okay. You want to try to get into all of the areas of the model so that you've got that dark primer into all those nooks and crannies, because that's really where having that dark color really counts. So just as you're going, just kind of inspect. Make sure you get under the backpack there. Okay, and that's our prime. I think we're done. So you can see all I was doing on that trigger was literally just pushing down and pulling it back till it hit the stop. I was coming in and out of it somewhat like this. Okay, That's a useful way to control your speed of application, but I'm just pulling it back to the stop, maintaining that distance. Okay, so now we've got our primer down. I'm going to set the miniature to the side, just let that dry a little bit. The next step is we're going to put down a Zenithal. Now, of course, because the primer was black, we really want to get that out of the airbrush. So let's throw some cleaner in there. I'm going to pick up our little stirrer again. You can use pretty much anything. You can use the wrong end of a paintbrush for this or the right end of a paintbrush. Really doesn't matter too much. If you're going to use an actual brush, please use one that's got good bristles that don't break off in the airbrush. Brand I like is Artis Opus. They seem to know how to make a paintbrush so that it doesn't do that. And then set the collar to the default settings so that you can pull the trigger all the way back. Now you'll notice that I always pump the trigger when I'm cleaning. That's because I want to move the needle back and forth in and out of the nozzle and the needle seal to clean it on its whole length. Okay, so we're done. If you can see any residue in the cup of that dark primer, I just keep some little squares of kitchen towel to the side, just jam my finger in there, give it a wipe, get it out, done. Okay, that's simple. Okay, now we're going to go to setting number 1. This is the setting for a Zenithal primer. Now, make sure that you sprayed all the cleaner out of the airbrush. You don't want that left in there. It might change your thinning ratios. Pick up your thinner again. I'm going to put in 7 drops again because I just really like the number 7. So 7 drops of thinner. And then I'm using dead white from Gamechanging. Let's drop 7 drops of that in there as well. Okay, and then we pick up our little paint mixer tool. Let's give that a twizz in there. Mix that paint up nicely with the thinner. Okay, and we're good to go. So just a quick pull just to get the color moving. And again, the Zenithal setting, we go 1 hand's width away from the part on setting number 1. Now we've got to pick where we want our light source to be. So there's a lot of interest on this side of the miniature. So I'm going to say that we're going to bring our light source in from there. I'm not going to come too much around that side because I want to be able to pick up the tops of both of his boots. So I'm going to go from just about here. So I've got that distance away, and basically all I've got to do, press down, pull it back to the stop, and just let that paint fall in the same way the light would do. Keep a little bit of movement in the airbrush. Just pulse that trigger backwards and forwards. Okay, a little bit of rotating there. The backpack is really out the way, so I might just drop a bit of color on it, a bit of highlight on it from the top here. But be fairly strict about not letting your highlights come from all angles. You want to, broadly speaking, be coming from that one angle that you've chosen. Now that you've got your Zenithal down, go to setting number 2. So this allows the trigger to be pulled back slightly less, and it enables you to come in closer and basically pick up some of the highlights to make them stronger. You want to be the width of about 2 fingers away from the model at this point. So you just kind of gauge that yourself. Okay, we're about there, all good. Press the trigger down, and I'm going to go for the top of the backpack here, so just a little stroke across the top, just to reinforce that. I'm looking at the helmet. Obviously, that's a focal point, so 2 fingers away, and I'm just going to pull that all the way back to stop. A couple of pulses. That's reinforced really nicely now. Same thing for the shoulder pad. Let's just pick that up a bit. Okay, now I'm noticing that the speed of the spray is slowing down a bit. This means that I've probably got some color that's starting to dry on the tip of the needle. As soon as you notice that, you want to deal with it, because every clog is preceded by color drying on the tip of the needle. So I like to use dry brushes for this. Again, I'm kind of a fan of the Artis Opus brand because I've noticed that their brushes just don't tend to lose bristles inside the airbrush, and that's super useful. So you keep a mug here with a bit of airbrush cleaner in it, water, whatever. Their dry brushes are nice because they've got a really stiff core. These holes on the side of the front of the airbrush are designed that you can just literally prod a brush in there and just twizzle it around. What that will do is it will guide the bristles in such a way to clean the needle tip, okay, without giving you any possibility of damage. So you just get in there. You can be pretty firm about it. You know, you can see I'm not being careful. I can even do it with my eyes closed. Doesn't really matter. It's going to be fine because it's engineered in. Press the trigger down a couple of times to blow that out. And our airbrush is going to be working just great once again. So I'm going to come back on the top of that shoulder pad, same distance, 2 fingers away. To reinforce that highlight, I want to get the top of the weapon a little bit more. Top of the forearm. I think I'd like a little bit more on the top of his belt. Down there. I think this shoulder pad needs a little bit more, and just the top of the armor here. I think that we get it a little more just to pick up some of the relief on the backpack. Just a little more from there. I'm going to call that good from the highlight stage. Now I'm going to turn my collar back to the default setting, so I've got the full movement of the trigger. Get rid of that white from the airbrush. Okay, throw some cleaner in there again. And again, I'm just going to pulse the trigger while I'm spraying the cleaner through, just so that I really clean the full length of that needle. Get the tip nice and wet. It's important to have a full pull on the trigger when you're cleaning. Okay, so we've got that done. I'm going to pick up some kitchen towel, front of the airbrush, a little bit of a wipe, and wipe inside that cup just to get rid of all traces of white. And I think I'd like to just put a little bit more cleaner through there because I don't want to corrupt the next color with any white. Okay, so good to go. Make sure it's all sprayed out. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any macragé blue, but I'm just going to use some ultramarine for this next step. And I'm going to do something that I think adds a little bit of spice to the cook-up. Some of you may not agree, but I kind of like it. So I'm going to put 7 drops of thinner in. Then I'm going to put 6 drops of ultramarine in. And this is kind of like a bit of cayenne pepper in your eggs. I'm just going to put 1 drop of silver in there. Reason for that is I just think that, you know, when you've got a miniature on the tabletop, just that little bit of metallic in there, just that little bit, just gives it a little bit of a frosty sheen, which I think is kind of cool. So we mix that up real nice and thoroughly. And we're going to put it on the setting base, okay? Okay, so just test it. Make sure we got the color coming through. And again, for base, we're going to go 1 hand's width away. And we just get that color on that model. Okay, so it's a pretty quick process. Just little, I like to keep the trigger depressed and then just pulse in and out of it. Okay, and that's it, done. So I think now we've got a model which is extremely simply done. I think it's ready to be hit with a dry brush. It's got some good highlights on there. It's got some nice shape from the model. Okay, now we're going to just do a couple of other models. We're going to do one in yellow, one in red. And again, with a little bit of cayenne pepper in the egg, as I said earlier. And a couple of notes about this while I'm painting that I think are pretty important. So this system is actually geared up to paint fast. And so what I mean by that is, you know, we're thinking that a lot of people are looking to paint armies quickly. So this is a fast painting system. If you want to slow it down a bit, there's no problem to do that. just use a little bit less thinner, a little bit more paint, or drop the pressure down to about 20 psi. Then you'll have a slightly slower painting system. It'll still work exactly as well, but it'll just be slower. If you'd like to make one of these little paint mixing tools, you just get a needle and just wrap it around a piece of bar until it makes this shape. I don't know if you can see that well. And it's really useful to just be able to twiddle it in there to mix paint up. Just make sure there's no sharp edges on there after you've done it, because obviously the last thing you want to do is to scratch the inside of your beautiful new hardened Steenbeck airbrush. Okay, so let's get these guys into base. So I've mixed up my base. I've set the airbrush to prime. Mixed up my primer, set the airbrush to prime, approximately 1 hand's width away. And basically, just pull that back to hit the stop. Okay. Just start getting that primer down. I like to paint with the trigger down all the time and then just pulse back and forth. I started out life as a car painter, and that's the way that we're taught to use spray guns, and I guess it's just gone over into how I use the airbrush. So you'll notice that the air is pretty much on all the time when I'm painting. I think it's also a little bit of a bonus because I've always got air moving over the miniature, so I just get to dry it a little quicker than otherwise. Okay, so I'm going to say that that prime job is done. I'm just going to do this guy without using a stand because we're just trying to get this done in a little bit of a hurry. And so, same thing, about a hand's width away, just trying to make sure that I pick up all of the undercuts in the molding. Always just pulling the trigger all the way back to the stop as dictated by the prime setting. And now we're just getting onto the top of the model. Okay, all good. So that is 2 models into primer. I'm really happy with the coverage there. I think that that's a really solid prime job. So now we're going to go straight into the Zenithal highlight. So we turn the collar onto the fully open setting, plug the airbrush into the spray out station, get rid of what's left in there, dump a bit of cleaner in. You just want to spray that through and pulse the trigger so that you clean the full length of the needle. That's kind of important. Okay, and then it's a nice time saver just to wipe out the inside of the cup rather than cleaning it. Just saves a bit of time. It means you can get those models into paint and on the table that little bit faster. So we're doing 2 models this time. So again, I'm going to put, I think I'm going to go for 10 drops of this. Should be enough for the Zenithal. I'm going to pick up my little paint mixer, just make sure that the dark primer is wiped off that nice and good. Twiddle that around in there, mix that paint up nicely. One thing is when you put the thinner in first, the first shot that comes out of the airbrush is going to be pure thinner. So get rid of that first before you start to paint. For Zenithal, we go on to setting 1, okay? And that restricts the trigger a little bit more, slows the painting speed down. The distance, again, it's 1 hand's width away from your model. So we're going to have these guys going into battle in a line, so we need to think about getting them with the same direction of highlights. So I'm going to come in from here. So this width away, and pulling it all the way back to the stop again. Make sure I catch the top of that hand at the back there, the top of the knee and the boot with the Zenithal. Not too much down. A little bit on the weapon. Let's take a look, see what we've got there. Again, we just want to, backpacks are so interesting. We just want to pick a little bit up there. Once that step's complete, we turn on to 2. We come in closer, about the width of 2 fingers, and we decide which areas we want to reinforce. So the obvious, the top of the backpack, shoulder pad, helmet, other shoulder pad, top of the weapon, the gloves. I think I can just about get the top of that knee there, top of that shoe, and the back of that back leg. It's quite a strict, dramatic lighting. I want to soften that shoulder pad a little bit and I think bring a little bit more perhaps onto that breastplate. And now we're getting a little bit of needle tip drying. So I'm always glad when this happens because it lets me demonstrate how to deal with it. So you get your dry brush and you just jam it into these holes, okay? There's no need to be subtle about it. You just want to make sure you've got a brush that's got a firm enough bristle set that you're not hitting the airbrush with the ferrule, okay? This is why I like dry brushes, and this is why I like the Artis Opus dry brush in particular. Okay, so now we're moving again. Let's get a little bit more on that breastplate, and that is done. So we're going to pull out this model and get onto our second. So we go back to setting number 1, which is for the Zenithal. Get our angle set up again. 1 hand's width away. Just pull it back to stop. Just pulse that. Get that highlight down onto the model. Keep your positioning. Just work your way around until it's dropped enough color on there that you can go to the second step of detail highlighting and just work with what that Zenithal system has already created for you. So again, top of the backpack, 2 fingers width away. Just reinforce that. Shoulder pad. This guy, top of the arm, top of the weapon, top of the helmet as well. Far shoulder pad. A little bit of detail there. Let's pick up that boot. I'd like to just pick up the top of that boot as well, and I think the magazine on the weapon we can catch a little bit there as well. A little bit more on the top of the base plate. We've lost the miniature. Oh my goodness. Let's clip that back in again. And just the top of the backpack there. Okay, so I've got a little bit of a higher value on that other one, so I'm just going to reinforce this a bit more here. I'm going to go back to the Zenithal setting. And I think we're good. So now I want to clean the airbrush out, so I go back to the default setting, spray out the remainder of that white, dump some cleaner in there. Always pulse the trigger so that you clean the full length of the needle. Okay, I have my little squares of paper towel at the ready here, so I'm just going to shove that into the cup, give it a quick wipe around, wipe the front of the airbrush. If in doubt, at any point, pick up your dry brush with some airbrush cleaner on it, give it a bit of a jam in the front there. No harm in cleaning that in between colors as well, as it just keeps that tip drying at bay. So let's go on to this model first, I think, and we're going to cook up a little bit of a bronzy red recipe here. So again, we're going to go for, say, 5 drops of thinner. What color have I got here? I've got Sanguina, Rioja Sanguina, blood red. 4 drops of that. So this is a very, very powerful red. And I'm going to knock it down a little bit in terms of its brightness by dropping a little bit of bronze in there with it, just 1 drop. And again, just gives this kind of cool, slightly frosty look, which I just really like. May not be to everybody's taste, but I think it's kind of fun. Okay, so we're going to get this onto the setting base. And remember, just a quick pull initially to get rid of any thinner that's loaded up at the front of the brush. And really what we want to do here is just get all around this miniature and make sure that we tint the highlight job that we did. So just pull it back to the stop. I love the way this metallic interacts with the darker areas of the model. The distance again, by the way, is 1 hand's width away, okay? Okay, we go on to the default setting again. Do we want to get a little more on the breastplate there? I think we do, actually. There we go. Okay. So we spray out that into our spray out pot once again. Again, dump a bit of cleaner in there. Pulse the trigger always, just helps to clean that needle up. You'll notice that I haven't bothered to pull the needle out to clean the tip in between any of these color changes. That used to be a pretty common thing to do with the airbrush. You really don't need to do it with this tip cleaning system that we've got on the airbrush now. So again, just in between the colors, just jam that dry brush in there. Get it nice and clean. Get one of your paper towels. Quick wipe. Clean up the inside. Make sure that no cleaner is left in there. And then we're going to go to the other miniature that we highlighted previously. And again, I'm going to go for a little recipe here. So 5 drops of thinner. I'm going to put a fairly vibrant yellow on here, the sun yellow from Vallejo. 4 drops of that. And then 1 drop of gold. You've got to be careful with the metallic. If you put too much in, then it makes the color too opaque and it sort of obliterates the highlight somewhat, so you've just got to be judicious with it. This is about as much as I'd ever want to put in, really. Okay, so we go to the base setting again. Yellow struggles to build up opacity, so we just got to go a little bit more slow with this one, just build it up a little bit more slowly so it's more quick strokes. Always full to the stop on the base setting, 1 hand's width away. So trigger down and pulse. Okay, we just let that start to build up. Get into all angles of the model. Just maintain that distance. And you're looking to get a slight sheen on the model. You don't really want to see a gloss, just a slight sheen. And that's going to be enough that you're going to get enough color down on there to have the effect that you want, but you're not going to make it wet, okay? Okay. As always, #1 rule of airbrushing, the moment you finish painting, the first thing you want to do is you want to spray out the paint that's in there and get that airbrush cleaned. And if you just get into that habit from day one, then your life will be easy. So we'll just get a bit of cleaner in there, point it on our spray out pot, pulse the trigger while we're running some cleaner through there. It's always good to do a bit more cleaner than less, no harm in that. And what you'll notice is once I've finished spraying that through, and this is kind of what I really want to show people with this video as well, is this whole thing about like how complicated is it to maintain and clean an airbrush. We're going to finish this off keeping it really simple. I'm going to pick this brush up, the good old dry brush, give it a bit of a jab on the front there into each of those 4 holes in the air cap. Okay. One of the reasons why we're only supplying the Ultra with the 0.45 setup is because it's wonderfully robust. You can get that brush in the front there as long as you don't hit anything with the ferrule. You can just clean that up with the brush and it's not going to cause any kind of an issue in the front of the airbrush at all. Bit of a wipe around there. And now if we look now, so let's have a look inside there. All the color's gone. If we pull the cup out, there's no evidence of any color in the airbrush at all. Let's take the handle off, get the needle out. And if I draw that across the back of my hand, there's really no color left on the needle either. Okay? So that's enough, guys, if you clean it immediately after you've been painting. And it really is just that simple. Hope you've enjoyed the video. And please, if you do decide to join us, you've got our absolute support. If you need any kind of customer service as a beginner, get in touch with the company. Talk to us on social media. We've got a wonderful community of artists who are always ready to help. And enjoy your painting journey. And we really hope that these innovations on our new beginner airbrush will support you in your painting journey. And we also know that this airbrush, once you get past the beginner phase, is actually fantastic for painting up to much higher levels as well. If you want to put a more finely detailed head on there, then the Harder and Steenbeck modular construction means you can switch out, put a fine line 0.2 tip on there, and you're going to be able to get into some really fine detail with the same airbrush that supported you in your beginner's journey straight out of the box. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Please do like and subscribe. Give us your comments. Tell us what you think we've missed, and we'll feed that all into our continuous development program. Thanks so much.